There are cases where the question isn't who did it, it's why the person who did it walked free. In Queensland, a woman admitted in court that she had planned, prepared, and carried out her husband's death. She admitted to every step, no denial, no cover-up. And it took the jury just 90 minutes to find her not guilty on every charge. No murder, no manslaughter either. This case didn't end with a conviction. It ended with a question that still doesn't have a clear answer today. When does self-defense become a crime? And when does it not? 2 June 2006, Caloundra, Queensland. Susan Falls appeared in front of television cameras, appealing to the public to help find her husband, Rodney Falls, who she said had disappeared without explanation. She appeared with a distressed expression, appealing to anyone with information to contact police, and saying she was deeply worried about her husband. Queensland police took the report and formally opened a search for Rodney Falls, a 41-year-old man living in Caloundra, who worked from home and was described by his family as cheerful and loving toward his children. But while the whole community was worried and hoping for Rodney's return, there were things only Susan knew. The search for Rodney Falls was carried out across Caloundra and the surrounding areas. Police combed the area, interviewed neighbors and people who knew Rodney. They checked the routes he regularly took and contacted his friends and colleagues. Susan Falls continued to appear publicly during this period, maintaining the image of a worried wife waiting for news of her husband. The following weeks passed in silence and hopelessness, until a discovery in dense bushland in northern Queensland changed everything. 25 June 2006, Rodney Falls's body was found in bushland at Mapleton State Forest, Queensland. This is a remote forest, not somewhere people would happen to pass through. The body had been there for a considerable time before it was found. Police were notified immediately, and after the identification process, the body was confirmed to be Rodney Falls. The search was over, but what police now needed to find out was who had brought Rodney Falls to this location. The Mapleton State Forest area, where the body was found, was completely sealed off. The crime scene examination team worked meticulously, documenting the body's position, the surrounding terrain, and any trace that could be connected to whoever had brought Rodney here. The location of the body, deep in the forest, far from any trail, suggested this was a spot chosen deliberately. No one would end up here by chance. Alongside this, Rodney Falls's body was taken to a forensic facility for formal examination. The forensic findings confirmed Rodney Falls did not die of natural causes. This was a criminal matter, and police began focusing the investigation in that direction. The Queensland police investigation began reconstructing the sequence of events, from the last time Rodney was seen through to the discovery of his body. They interviewed people who knew Rodney and Susan. They reviewed phone records and communications from the period before Rodney went missing. And gradually, a picture began to emerge. During questioning and evidence gathering, police began uncovering notable connections between Susan and several men around the time Rodney disappeared. Phone records showed Susan had been in contact with a number of men in the period surrounding Rodney's disappearance, and the frequency and timing of those contacts were enough to raise questions for investigators. These were the first pieces of the puzzle, and when placed together, they began pointing in the same direction. Susan Falls, Rodney's wife, was the person at the center of this entire case. She and Rodney married and had several children together. Their marriage lasted many years, but what was really happening inside that house was known only to Susan. The two had separated in 2000, but later reconciled and lived together again. And that was all the outside world knew about Susan Falls, until she was arrested. Rodney Falls, 41, lived in Caloundra, Queensland, a quiet coastal town his family had been excitedly preparing to move to. He worked from home, buying and selling online, and spent most of his time with his family. Those who knew him described him as cheerful, quick to laugh, and always ready to be there when someone needed him. Rodney left school before the age of 15, but didn't let that hold him back. He taught himself and earned qualifications in air conditioning, refrigeration, and electrical work. He had built homes in Blacktown, Pelican Waters, and Caloundra, building his life step by step with his own hands. His mother, Van Donselaar, said, "He met and married Susan, and in the first 4 years of their marriage, they had 3 beautiful daughters. Then, 10 years later, the family welcomed a precious son." His sister, Kim Page, spoke about the last time the two siblings talked. "We were both so excited about the family moving to Caloundra. We had so many plans. All those hopes and dreams for that future were shattered." His family described Rodney as someone who would always be remembered as a loving family man, someone his closest loved ones called a genuinely good person all round. And that was the man Susan Falls had married. But what happened inside that marriage was only revealed once Susan was brought in for questioning. After weeks of investigation, Queensland police had enough grounds to act. From phone records, statements from people who knew the couple, and the evidence gathered, police identified Susan Falls as the primary suspect in Rodney's death. They also identified 3 men connected to the case. Anthony Cummings Creed, who had financial dealings with Susan in the period before Rodney disappeared, and who appeared in notable phone communications. Bradley James Coop, 25, and Anthony James Hoare, 42. 2 men who had also been in contact with Susan around the time of Rodney's disappearance. With this evidence, police proceeded to arrest all 4. Susan Falls was arrested and taken to the police station for formal questioning. Cummings Creed, Coop, and Hoare were also arrested separately, accused of involvement in the case. At the police station, Susan was questioned about what had happened to her husband, and Susan did not deny it. She began to tell the story, from beginning to end. At the police station, investigators began questioning Susan Falls. Faced with the evidence police had already gathered, the phone records, the connections to Cummings Creed, and the 2 other men, Susan knew that continuing to deny it would no longer work. And she decided to talk. Not part of it, not in small pieces. She told the whole thing, from beginning to end. With a calm that would later leave the entire interview room stunned, Susan Falls said her decision hadn't come about in a single day. She said she had endured years of abuse from Rodney, physical violence, financial control, and psychological intimidation. She said she had lived in fear for a long period of time. In early March 2006, she followed the case of Claire MacDonald in Victoria, a woman who was acquitted after ambushing and taking her husband's life with a rifle, on the grounds of protecting herself from abuse. According to her statement, this was the point at which Susan decided to act. She contacted Anthony Cummings Creed and paid $5,000 to purchase a suppressed .22 caliber pistol on the black market. 26 May 2006. While Rodney was drinking at the pub, Susan prepared a prawn curry for dinner, mixing in a large quantity of crushed sleeping pills, using the smell of the curry to mask it. She knew the children wouldn't eat that dish, only Rodney would. After eating, Rodney grew drowsy and fell asleep in his armchair. What happened next that night, Susan recounted every detail with a calm that left the entire interview room in silence. These are details the court recorded in full in the case file, but due to their extremely sensitive nature, we cannot present or describe them directly here. What matters is, Rodney Falls died that night, and it all happened in front of their 2 daughters. Susan then kept the body in the house for 3 days before calling Cummings Creed and the 2 other men to help transport the body to Mapleton State Forest. The case file was built from multiple layers of evidence. First, Susan's own statement. Susan did not deny what she had done. Her statement was detailed and clear, and became the foundation of the entire case file. Second, the statements of her accomplices. Cummings Creed, Coop, and Hoare confirmed their roles in helping Susan transport and dispose of the body at Mapleton. Third, the weapon evidence. The suppressed .22 caliber pistol, bought on the black market for $5,000, was evidence Susan had planned in advance. This was not an impulsive act. Fourth, the forensic findings. Confirming Rodney's cause of death, consistent with Susan's statement. The Queensland Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions charged Susan Falls with premeditated murder. Susan Falls was charged with murder at the Supreme Court of Queensland. Anthony Cummings Creed, Bradley James Coop, and Anthony James Hoare were charged as accessories. This was a case where, from the very start, the defense had a clear strategy, not to deny what Susan had done, but to argue she had the right to do it. That strategy rested on two foundations: battered woman syndrome and the right to self-defense under Australian law. The trial took place at the Supreme Court of Queensland, presided over by Justice Peter Applegarth. The prosecution argued Susan Falls had planned this deliberately, buying a gun, preparing the sleeping pills, planning every step, and carrying it out systematically. This was the action of someone in control of the situation, not someone acting in fear and self-defense. The prosecution also pointed out Rodney had stopped his abuse since the couple separated in 2000, meaning at the time Susan acted, she was not under any direct threat. The defense argued Susan had endured years of serious abuse from Rodney. Even if the physical abuse may have stopped, the fear and psychological trauma remained. She acted because she believed her life and her children's lives were in danger. The defense also invoked battered woman syndrome, arguing that a woman who has endured prolonged abuse may not need to be facing an immediate threat to have the right to self-defense, because she has been living in a constant state of fear. Justice Applegarth gave the jury an important instruction. Under Australian law, the defense does not need to prove Susan was acting in self-defense. The prosecution must prove she was not. This was a burden of proof that was almost impossible to meet in this case. The judge also found that even if Rodney may have stopped the abuse after the 2000 separation, Susan could still have a right to self-defense based on the earlier history of abuse, because the threat does not need to be immediate, it can be a future one. After hearing all the evidence and testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Just 90 minutes later, the jury returned with its verdict. Susan Falls found not guilty on all counts. No murder, no manslaughter. And just as shocking, Anthony Cummings Creed, Bradley James Coop, and Anthony James Hoare, the men who had helped Susan transport and dispose of the body, were also found not guilty of being accessories. A few weeks after being acquitted, Susan Falls appeared on Channel 9's A Current Affair and recounted in detail what she had done that night, calm and clear. And from that point, this case became one of the most legally controversial cases in Australian history. The second case, Centrelink fraud. Almost 12 months after her acquittal, Susan was charged with Centrelink fraud, claiming to be a single mother while married from 2001 to 2006, totaling $78,284. Susan pleaded guilty, but claimed her husband had forced her into it. She repaid the full amount from income earned through media deals. The Susan Falls case is not a simple story of right or wrong. It is a story about the line between self-defense and premeditated murder, and about what happens when that line becomes blurred. The first perspective, Susan is a victim. If what Susan said is true, she lived for years in violence, control, and fear. In that context, her decision was not the act of a cold-blooded criminal, but the act of someone who was exhausted and could see no other way out. Battered woman syndrome is a recognized psychological reality, and it explains why many victims of domestic violence don't leave, don't report to police, and don't seek help in the ways outsiders might consider normal. The second perspective, this was premeditated murder, but there are details that are hard to overlook. Susan did not act in a moment of panic or immediate fear. She spent money on a suppressed gun. She prepared sleeping pills. She waited for the right moment. And she did all of this after following the case of Claire MacDonald, a woman acquitted using a similar strategy. Prosecutors raised the question, If Susan had enough composure and planning to do all of that, why didn't she use that same composure and planning to leave the relationship some other way? Legal precedent. This case, alongside the earlier Claire MacDonald case, created a significant legal precedent in Australia that someone who has been abused does not need to be facing an immediate threat to have the right to self-defense. A future threat, based on a history of abuse, can be enough to justify the action. This is a precedent supported by many, because it acknowledges the psychological reality of domestic violence. But it is also a precedent that concerns many others, because the line between self-defense and premeditated murder becomes very difficult to define. Susan Falls was acquitted. She is free. And she told her story on national television. Rodney Falls will forever be 41. His family is still waiting for an answer the legal system never gave them. And this case leaves 3 questions we want to hear your thoughts on. First, which side are you on in this case? Was Susan a victim who acted out of desperation, or was this a premeditated murder that the legal system got wrong? Second, the legal precedent this case created, in your view, does it accurately reflect the reality of those living with domestic violence? Third, if Susan truly was a victim of years of abuse, where did the system fail her, and what could have stopped this story from happening? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'll read all of them. The Susan Falls case has no simple answer, but it leaves important lessons, both for individuals and for the system. The first lesson: domestic violence doesn't always leave a visible mark. One of the contentious points at trial was that some witnesses hadn't seen bruises on Susan in recent years. But Justice Applegarth was right to note, victims of domestic violence don't always carry visible signs. Psychological abuse, control, and intimidation can cause deep and lasting harm, even without bruising. If you or someone you know is in a relationship showing signs of control or intimidation, don't wait until there's a visible injury to speak up. The second lesson: support systems need to step in before tragedy occurs. The question this case raises isn't only whether Susan was guilty, it's why a woman felt she had no other choice but to do what she did. If support systems, police, courts, social services had intervened more effectively in the years before, this story may have had a different ending. For both Susan and Rodney. The third lesson: every case is a reminder of the importance of speaking up. Whichever side you're on in this case, the most important thing is this: if you're in a relationship where you feel unsafe, tell someone. Contact the authorities. Seek help before things escalate beyond saving. If you or someone you love needs support, call now. In Australia, emergency 000. 24/7 domestic violence support. 1-800-RESPECT. On 1-800-737-732. Crisis mental health support. Lifeline on 13 11 114. Crime Australia, HT produces this content for the purpose of informing and educating the community. We do not take a side in this case. We simply present the facts and let you form your own judgment. All information presented is based on court records and verified news sources.